Hey guys, Social Communications, and welcome back to another review. This time it's going to be a pretty short review of a new film that just came out. I don't know if it's really a 2014 film because I know it's coming out on, well, it says it's 2014 film on IMDb. So it says it's going to be coming out in 2015 sometime, probably on DVD or whatever in the US. There's a French DVD that's going to be coming out in 2015. Anyway, the movie I'm talking about is Electric Boogaloo. The Wild Untold Story of Canon Films. It's a movie, a documentary directed by Mark Hartley and written by Mark Hartley. This is a guy who directed some fun documentary on Australian movies called Not Quite Hollywood, which I thought was entertaining. And this is a documentary I've been waiting for a couple years now. And it's a documentary that I checked out for the first time last night. It's kind of bittersweet. I mean, I'd say like after I watched it, I didn't really have this feeling of disappointment automatically. But when I woke up this morning and I thought about it some more, then I started to get this, this really sick feeling in the pit of my stomach when I was thinking about this documentary. And the reason why is that this documentary is not a love letter to Canon Films. It may want to act like it is. It may want to have something at the end credits that says that, oh, despite all of their problems, Benham Golan and Yoram Globus, they lived the dream, da-da-da-da-da. They did some things that other companies haven't ever been able to do. Blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't change the fact that there's a disproportionate amount of canon bashing in this documentary. And I understand it kind of felt like shit talking canon style for a little bit too longer. It was too close to comfort. It was like there's too much shit talking here. I understand it started out rather promising, this documentary. It started out with this sort of heartwarming sort of tale of these two guys, Yoram and Menahem Golan, living in Israel, trying to make American movies, trying to be filmmakers, trying to do this, and they end up, and it was talking about the importance of family and their friendship and everything. Started with a really bitchin' awesome opening credits scene, which I really love. It's really cool. That alone feels like a love letter to Canon Films, the opening credits. And then as the film goes along, though, you just start to notice this disturbing pattern of just, Canon sucks. Canon is shit. Canon is this. Canon is that. Canon Films, they are schlockmeisters. They made nothing but shitty movies. Or if they did make anything good, it was by accident. And blah, 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 blah. And there was a distinct lack of compassion for Canon in a film that supposedly, I've heard it's supposed to be a love letter to Canon Films, but it felt like it was exploiting it. Of all things, Canon Films, which is a company that released a kind of decent amount of exploitation films, it felt like its documentary was in itself exploiting Canon. And that's something that I'm like, that really wasn't the best approach. Now, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't entertained and I didn't laugh at some of the wild, crazy stories, and I'd be lying if I said it wasn't worth at least one watch. Just to hear some of these outrageous tales that some of the people had who worked with Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus. And I'll admit, Canon isn't perfect. They did a lot of shitty movies. I mean, they started out doing I can see why some people in the industry don't look fondly back at Canon Films. I mean, they made a lot of mistakes. They made tons of movies, but not all of them were of great quality. I gotta be honest, I could probably admit, and even though I'm a fan of Canon, I could probably say that there are probably more shitty Canon films that were made by Canon or released by Canon than there actually are good films. Especially because, all of their porno flicks or softcore porno flicks or their really bad fucking movie like Bo Derek's Bolero or, the movies they did down near the end where they couldn't really finish it, and like Journey to the Center of the Earth, which now I know why it sucks so much, because they had to hire Albert Poontang to, shoot some scenes to replace some replace some scenes that had missing special effects footage. Um, but it did feel like there wasn't. It felt like you kind of had to twist people's arms in this documentary to say good things about canon. And I think, and there seemed like there's more good things about canon that were said by like old interviews with, like old movie reviews, like Leonard Moulton or something. And there was a few instances where there were some people who, like Robert Forster said, he really liked working with Madame Gould, and he said he was one of the better directors he's worked with. Um, Franco Zeffirelli, legendary film director, directed Romeo and Juliet, and he did Otello for Canon Films. And he says that he loves Canon. He's forever in debt to them, to Madame Golan and Yoram Globus. And he says that he thinks Otello is his best film, and so there was a lot of good positives from him. And Michael Dudikoff was speaking pretty fondly. The little bit that he was in the film, Alex Winter's Bill S. Preston Esquire had more screen time in this documentary than the American Ninja, and he was in a fucking little tiny bit part in Death Wish 3, and he pretty much shit talks Death Wish 3, which I don't really appreciate, but to each their own. I'm okay with the differing opinions. I'm okay with you have moments where, hey, okay, we're talking about canon films, and we'll talk about them for good, for better, or for worse. But it seemed like to me, and I know I'm not alone on this, and I know this is not how I felt originally, but after I thought about it some more, and I looked up canon films filmography for myself, that to get ready for this review, I realized that, yeah, I mean, a lot of this was just shit-talking canon, and canon films, and canon films is shit, and canon films sucks, and canon films is this, and these are two guys who should have never been in the movie business in the first place. And even movies like Alan Quartermain, Lost City of Gold, there's pretty much a lot of people saying, in King Solomon's Mine, just saying they're shit. These movies are shit, and it got tiresome after a while. It's like, yes, shit like Lambada and fucking The Forbidden Dance, those are shit. I mean, Breakin' I'm not a big fan of, but it was their first really big hit, which is kind of an interesting sort of thing. It just didn't seem like there was a lot of canon films where they were at all speaking very kindly on them, except for maybe briefly. Cyborg had Albert Poontang saying that Jean-Claude Van Damme was more interested in how he looked instead of acting, and his director's cut was better or some shit. And I'm like, Albert Poontang, shut the fuck up. What the fuck? Your director's cut sucked ass, and Jean-Claude Van Damme did better than you because he had to come in and re-edit the film himself and delivered a better product because you're a shitty director, Albert Poontang. Why the fuck should I take you seriously? And there's another guy who was interviewed who said that Cyborg was a lot better once Van Damme got a hold of it. And Over the Top was just shit on. There was nothing about Over the Top that was at all. They just said it was a mistake, and just nothing but shitting on Over the Top. Nothing but shitting on this movie. And saying, like, oh, the writers, like, my screenplay was a lot better than the movie it turned out to be because, it's not very interesting to see arm wrestling or whatever. I mean, it's not very engaging. I mean, I'm like, I was engaged. I was entertained. I fucking love this movie. I'm going to bring it out right now. This movie kicks fucking ass. And this movie was better than the documentary. I didn't hate the documentary, but it is kind of a review/rant because at the end of the day, I think this Canon Films documentary was okay. It was so-so. It was fun to hear some of the crazy stories, like the crew hating Sharon Stone so much on the set of King Solomon's Mines that they pissed in the pot, that she ends up getting drunked in the film. And then she's like, oh, why does this pot smell so bad? Why does this water smell so weird? It's just such a, that kind of fun stuff. How Hercules, Lou Ferrigno's Hercules, the original screenplay was like a porno flick with you know, people, women sucking off Hercules' dick, and Madame Golden's like, no, no, I want a kids movie. What is this? The first couple of pages is just sucking off a dick, and then there's like one. It was like there was like one part of a script, and I think it was the Mata Hari script or something. It was some script. Like the first like thing that one of the guys read was "na na 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 suck my banana." It was just like, what the fuck? There were a lot of those what the fuck kind of, you know, really wild and crazy stories. And I think it's less of a documentary and more of, hey, let's get everybody together that we can, we was involved with canon, and let's just have them tell their wild stories. Hey, Lorene Landon, let's hear why you hate canon films so much in America 3000. And she burns a copy of the VHS tape on camera. I mean, I don't, like I said earlier, I don't have a problem with having the two-sided coin, with having both sides of the equation, the positive and the negative, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But it felt like the good was maybe at best 30%, if not lower than that, and the bad was the majority of the film. And I think that was not what I was expecting, and that's not what a lot of other people who are fans of canon films are going to be expecting. So I would not be surprised if canon fans see this movie and are like, well, that was interesting. It was worth a watch, but, you know, I could have appreciated not so much shit talking. I mean, some movies deserve it, like The Apple and fucking Going Bananas. And in some respects, I can understand why some people don't care for King Solomon's Mines and Alan Quartermain and The Lost City of Gold, even though I enjoy those movies. Hercules is just a really bad, I can't say it's a good movie. It's a bad movie, but it's entertainingly bad. But even the Deathwish movies pretty much got shat on. American Ninja didn't have barely any focus at all, and they never talked about the sequels. They never talked about Firewalker. It wasn't definitive. They didn't talk about everything. They missed opportunities. They talked about 21st Century Pictures, but they missed opportunities to talk about Captain America, the 1990 film. And they had a perfect opportunity because they were saying at the end of The Forbidden Dance, they had like, this film is dedicated to the preservation of the rainforest, and they were talking about greenwashing and stuff. So they could have easily thrown that in, and it would have made sense. They didn't talk about other stuff like Tough Guys Don't Dance. They didn't talk about everything. They mentioned Barfly. They mentioned like Mata Hari, the Sylvia Crystal. They mentioned their softcore porn type flicks. They mentioned a few handful of canon films. But you didn't get any info about Over the Top. All you got was pretty much Over the Top sucks and that's it. And they paid Sly too much money. And I mean, like, I didn't want to hear that. You know. But I guess it's one of those. This is a documentary, I guess, in name only. I don't even know. I mean, I learned some things, but there's a lot of stuff that they talked about that I pretty much already knew because I had read about canon and I knew about most of this stuff already. So it was kind of like deja vu for someone like me who's already pretty well studied in terms of canon films. And the other stuff was just, hey, let's talk about how bad canon was. Let's get the MGM guy on board, and he'll just shit talk canon for, you know, every single moment he's on screen, and call them trash because they gave him nothing but trash movies. And I have to admit, yeah, during the period where they were with MGM, they didn't really give him a lot to work with, like Sahara and fucking The Apple and shit. But you know, and then, not The Apple, I think Cam released that himself. And The Apple was a piece of shit. I'm fine with people shitting on that. I have no argument with that. But Over the Top is not a complete fucking terrible movie. It's got a fan base. If it didn't, nobody would make this fucking hat that I'm wearing right now. And, you know, Master of the Universe, Dolph, it almost sounded like Dolph was shitting on the movie. I think he's fond of it since he has the He-Man sword in his house. So either they edited out whatever positivity he had to say, or, you know, they just asked him negative questions. It just seemed like the guy, the writer, Mark Hartley, maybe he was just, his whole point of this film documentary, The Wild Untold Story of Canon Films, was just to do the tabloid documentary. Let's get all the crazy stories. Let's get all this and this and that. Let's talk about how incompetent canon was. Let's talk about the mistakes that they made. Let's talk about the shitty movies that they made. Let's talk about what it was like to work for, making these shitty movies. And there was no labor of love. It didn't feel like there was a fan behind the camera. And they didn't even talk about fans of Canon. Canon Films has a pretty big fan base. I don't know, I'm surprised they didn't actually interview people who are fans of Canon Films and fans of what Canon did and what fans of, what they had to offer. It was like blink and you miss it, like positive stuff. Like some stuff like directors really liked working for Canon Films because Gould was a director himself and he knew how to work with directors and stuff like that. And and a few handful of other actors saying it was good time to work with them. And I can understand why some actors don't look back fondly at Canon because some of the things they asked them to do, I mean, they didn't have a stunt double for Cassandra Peterson, and Alan Quarterman lost Seat of Gold, so she was scared out of her mind doing a stunt by herself because Canon was so cheap. The whole idea that 95% of the company, its profits went into making the film, and 5% went to paying the people who worked for Canon. You see why some people don't look back fondly at working for Canon because of that. And they were a bit out of touch, I have to admit. They were out of touch. They came from Israel, and they've kind of tried to bring Israeli sort of values to American films, and it didn't really translate. And they did make mistakes, and there were times where they were too impulsive, and they should have learned when to quit and lick their wounds instead of just keeping making movie after movie after movie after movie after movie after movie, regardless of the quality. Maybe they should have stopped and thought for a second. They should have never tried to become Warner Brothers, going up and buying the rights to Superman and doing Superman 4 and doing this or that. Even though I like Over the Top and I like Masters of the Universe, that's not who Canon was, and it ended up killing their company. So there's a cautionary tale to be heard here, and I don't have a problem with that aspect of it. But when it came to the films themselves, it didn't seem like there was a majority of anybody who was interviewed that was like, I love Canon Films. And I think that's the problem for me. It's like, instead of a love letter to Canon, like I thought this was going to be when you see the movie poster, it's more of an exploitation film. It's let's exploit Canon Films. And it's kind of ironic. Canon Films released a lot of exploitation movies, and with their documentary, it in itself is also an exploitation film. And that's kind of, it's sad, and at the same time, it's not what I really wanted to see. But I have to admit, it was worth a watch. If I find it for dirt cheap sometime, I might pick it up. But that's it. It's not a movie I watch over and over again. It's definitely a little bit disappointing. I thought there's going to be a little bit more positives on Canon, since it is a cult company and it has a pretty big fan following. And it just seemed like they just got a lot of people together and just asked them questions about how bad Canon is. Oh, why don't you like Canon Films? Or do you like Canon Films? Or what are the crazy stories? And that's it. And it leaves you a little bit, it leaves you with a bad taste in your mouth in some respects, and also leaves you a bit hungry. You want more. You want more than what this film offered. Because Canon Films, I think, could have easily been like a 3-4 hour long documentary. Because it has so many different, there's so many films that have been released by Canon, and it's got a big fan base. So ideally, I would like to see another documentary that would focus on Canon Films from the perspective of of its fans. Because yes, it would be a little bit biased, but this is biased too. I mean, you could have two of them. Okay, you could have from the perspective of its fans, and then from the perspective of people who don't like it. But from the majority of Electric Boogaloo, it seemed like it was slanted towards the negative side, and the majority of it was, interviews with people who aren't fans of Canon. And I guess maybe that's the truth. A lot of people aren't fans of Canon who are in the industry or work for them, but that doesn't make for a very engaging documentary, because after a while you just get tired of the shit talking. You're just like, can I hear something? Can I hear somebody else's opinion other than this hater? Can I hear something other than hate? Can I hear somebody say something positive about canon? Oh, finally, somebody said something. Great. I'm really glad I heard that. I laughed. I have to admit there was a lot of stories I laughed at, and I was entertained by the documentary, but I was not satisfied. There's a difference between being entertained and being satisfied. And for me, Electric Boogaloo, the wild untold story of canon films, was a pretty unsatisfying documentary. It's okay. It's watchable. If you're curious, give it a look. But if you're a big diehard fan of canon, I think more than likely you will be disappointed with the results of this documentary, because the majority of it is a good amount of it is just let's hear all the crazy stories, and let's hear how bad canon is. And I don't think that's what a lot of people expected. And I'm proof of how opinions on the film can change overnight. Okay, I saw it last night, with a friend of mine, and we didn't see eye to eye, and he didn't like it at all. And I was like, I thought I liked it okay. And then after I slept on it, and I got up this morning and I did some more research, I was like, man, they forgot a lot of stuff too. They forgot to talk about Masters of the Universe sequel. They briefly mentioned Spider-Man, the unproduced movie. Like Michael Dudikoff said, I was going to play Spider-Man, or they show like the Spider-Man poster, and then blink and you miss it. They didn't talk about a lot of the unproduced films. I think that would have been entertaining. I got more out of the canon. I got more love for canon from the Facebook page for this movie, for Electric Boogaloo, where they're posting like posters and little and bits of info about the unproduced films. Why wasn't that in the documentary? Those were interesting, little bits of info about the unproduced films. All we saw was like 10-second segment where a guy's talking about a writer talking about, I wrote all these movies that never got made, and then boom, boom, blink and you make it, boom, boom, blink and you miss it, fucking posters, and you never got to hear anything about those movies. It just seemed like this documentary was right from the beginning not really technically actually a documentary. It's kind of like the drive-by history of canon films. It's for people who don't really know that much about canon. Here you go. And then for the people who do, we're like, can we get some new information? And a lot of it isn't that new. And then at the same time, any of the new stuff is just kind of funny stories. But then the rest of it's just shit talking. And after a while, shit talking gets old real fast. So that's why it's not going to have a lot of rewatchability for me, is because there's just a lot of shit talking in this documentary on canon. And, that's not what I call my idea of a good time. But at the end of the day, I was originally going to give it average, a rating like 3 stars, but I gotta be honest, the more and more I keep thinking about this movie, the more and more, my kind of, my rating keeps going down. So I think I'm gonna knock it down 1/2 star. I'm gonna give this documentary 2.5 stars out of 5. Mainly because this is a documentary that isn't much of a documentary. And so that's a problem. And also, it doesn't talk about as much of canon films as it could have. And it's an exploitation film on canon films. It's exploiting canon films and milking it and trying to get a laugh. And that seems like it's all it's about. It's like, hey, let's laugh at canon films. Oh, they were cool. They were fun. They made some really shitty movies, though. Ha ha ha, canon film sucks. But we love them anyway. And I don't, that's really not, what I call a definitive or a good documentary. It's, if it wasn't for the end credit stuff at the end where they actually said some final positive words about canon films, this rating would be even lower. But yeah, I originally was going to give this 3.5 stars, but the more and more I think about it, the more and more stuff that they forgot, the fact that it's a drive-by history of canon films, the fact that the movies that they talk about that canon made are very, very short, brief talking about it. It's an hour 43 minutes of a 43-minute documentary, and there's just brief snippets about canon films. I mean, more of the screen time for some of these brief snippets come from footage from the movies or the trailer instead of actually, I don't know, actually getting a little bit more out of Michael Dudikoff, or you know, a little bit more out of the Breaking guys, or a little bit more out of some of the people who actually liked canon films. It just, there was some stuff I liked, like Invasion USA. It was nice to hear about that story. But then again, that was stuff I already knew. That they rented out they used a shopping mall that was gonna get torn down so they could blow it up. Same thing for the suburbs, the houses they blew up. I knew that already. There was a lot of, I knew that already. Oh, Superman 4 had the budget slashed. I knew that already. Oh, this happened, this happened. I knew that already. Even Masters of the Universe is shit talking. They were shitting on Skeletor's makeup. Like, it just looks like a painted on Halloween, mask or something. I'm like, it doesn't look that fucking bad. I really do really enjoy Masters of the Universe. I think Franco is very underrated as a Skeletor. And I don't think the makeup looks that fucking bad. So it just seemed like there was a lot of moments in the film where I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, bullshit, it's not that bad. Over the Top isn't that fucking useless. What the fuck are you talking about? And they don't even mention Cobra. There's stuff they don't even mention. They don't even they show clips from, but they don't even mention it. And it just seemed like it could have been a lot better. So that's why it's unsatisfying for me at the end of the day. So yes, this is a review / rant on this movie, and I was not expecting that, but this was not a love letter to canon films. This was an exploitation film. So anyway, I really don't know what else to say about canon, about Electric Boogaloo, the wild, untold story of canon films, except if you can find it somewhere online, or if you can pick it up on DVD or Blu-ray when it comes out, give it a look, just for curiosity's sake, if you're curious. But if you're a diehard fan of canon, you're probably going to end up hearing a lot of stuff you already know, and you're going to hear a lot of shit. You're going to see a lot of shit talking on canon films, and that really, honestly, might really grind your gears and rub you the wrong way. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys later. See you.